Before we jump into today's video, I want to give a massive shout out to today's sponsor, Easy Roller Dice, with their new Kickstarter they just launched today for their new color spray collection. Like many of you, I am an absolute dice fiend with zero apologies. And when Easy Roller told me about how their new Kickstarter collection was going to be all about customization, I was like, yup, I'm in. That sounds awesome. As for me, I've already got my eyes on the speckled green with gold lettering in a set of D6s for my new Necron Army paint scheme, as well as a purple RPG set because, come on, everyone knows purple is the color of royalty. Just saying. Alright guys, so do me one favor when you slide over to check these out, use easyrollerdice.com/taking20, which I'll throw down in the description box below. It'll take you straight to all of the goodies for the new color spray collection, and it's a really easy way to help the channel out and let Easy Roller know that I sent you over. So thank you, Easy Roller, for being a part of the Taking 20 team. Alright, boys and girls, today I want to talk about the most fearsome, dangerous, most deadly Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition monsters broken down for every single challenge rating, aka their CR. The reason I wanted to do this was because I think it's an excellent exercise for new Dungeon Masters and old DMs alike in breaking down monsters when looking at their stat blocks to see what monsters will push their players and what monsters will be pushovers for their players. And, you know, what monsters will end up having a player rolling up a new character if the dice don't go well that night. Now, because this video has taken me hours and hours poring over every single stat block from every official D&D 5e publication so far, I'm going to split this video up a little bit, and today I'm going to cover CRs 1/8 through CR 8, so 11 different challenge ratings. Also, because as I started looking over all the stat blocks, it became very apparent to me that all of the named characters just got left alone for their CR regardless of what advantages or disadvantages were added to those stat blocks. I eventually made the decision to just exclude them. So, sorry, but things like the CR1 Deformed Duragar, which actually is a special character, didn't make the list, nor did other more officially named characters like Artis Cimber, etc. The game designers just didn't rebalance all of their CRs whenever changes were made to those blocks, and that sort of would defeat the purpose of this exercise. And I will also be listing all of the books for the monsters along with Amazon links below for those who have asked for said links in the past. Okay, everyone ready? Here we go. Starting off with CR 1/8, we have a singular standout with the Kobold Underling from the relatively new Explorer's Guide to Wildmount. Now, these monsters are squishy, but not too squishy for their CR. And what makes these so lethal is something we'll talk about a few times throughout the video: pack tactics. This is something you should be training yourself to look for when balancing your encounters. The next big flag we have is the static damage from their attacks, which comes in at a 1d6 plus 3. That static plus 3 combined with advantage on attacks from pack tactics is brutal and way too high for a CR 1/8 creature in my opinion. Not to mention, they have a solid ranged attack for another 1d6 plus 3, and finally they have an Explode on Death ability that does have a low dexterity save, but even PCs that pass it will still take half damage. Say what you will about Wildmount, this is just straight up unbalanced. It is a version of the standard Kobold stat block that is improved across every single stat, like every stat. Hit points, AC, melee to hit, melee damage, range to hit. Oh, and they just gave it an Explode on Death and kept it all at the same CR. All of these should be red flags for you, okay, when creating fun and balanced encounters using the built-in Dungeons & Dragons 5e CR system. And for fun, our runner-up, meanwhile, is the animated knife for its chunky AC at this challenge rating and hit points. Moving on to CR 1/4, I guess, we have the Armored Troglodyte from Dungeon of the Mad Mage. Again, much like the Kobold Underling was to the Kobold, so is the Armored Troglodyte to the standard Troglodyte, with improvements in two major areas. The AC has been boosted up from 11 to 14, which is pretty solid, and the Armored Troglodyte has also been given a 1d10 plus 2 longsword, although it only makes 2 attacks if you want to use the longsword instead of the claws. I'm going to be honest, this was really very close with both the standard Drow, who can just nuke a party with crossbow bolts that sleep the PCs into a TPK, and the Velociraptor, who has a meaty stat block on its own. What pushed the armored Trog into the top spot here was the multi-attack on a weapon that could feasibly drop 2 PCs in one single round while simultaneously imposing disadvantage on attacks against it. Yeah, that's just a lot going for it for a measly CR 1/4. It was bad enough when the Troglodyte Stench gave disadvantage on an AC of 11, but disadvantage against an AC of 14 now is a pretty huge swing. Now, something you should be looking for in these low levels are creatures that can drop multiple party members in a turn. That is a red flag for power level. Another thing to pay attention to here is the armored Troglodyte will almost always drop a character to 0 if it crits on a 1d10 plus 2. But if you're attacking a d6 plus 1 Constitution mod PC, there's a chance that a crit might just outright kill them with massive damage, instant death rules. Now, the last thing I want to include or mention real quick is that if you are including a few extra low-level CR 1/4 mobs to pair with higher-level encounters, then the Drow become the deadliest monster stat block. The coin flip of putting PCs to sleep from ranged attacks, especially from many of them, can turn an average encounter into a deadly one very quickly, so keep an eye on that. All right, moving on to CR 1/2 now. There is really only one monster. I didn't even put a runner-up here. This is such an absolute runaway. It's not even funny with the Skulk from Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. This monster will kill your group, period. It's permanently invisible unless they happen to have a mirror on them or a child that can point out the monster every round. What this means is they will be attacking at advantage, most likely, with the added bonus that if they do, they get an extra 2d6 in damage from their extra little stat block ability. The reason this is so deadly is because you'll be doubling all the dice rolled if they crit, which of course will happen more often if you're getting to roll at advantage every round. For the point of our exercise here, the red flag here are the more dice at advantage. That can and will burst down your PCs if you're not careful. The next thing to look at is survivability, which of course, regardless of AC and HP, minus spells like Burning Hands, permanent invisibility should usually handle pretty well. Thus, we have the most deadly CR 1/2 monster stat block in all of 5e. One of these things is not like the other. Next up, we have CR1, with maybe the toughest choice I had to make. As well, frankly, there are just so many CR1 stat blocks to dig through, and there were a handful of choices that all could have taken our top spot. Ultimately, the Bugbear and the Fire Newt Warlock of Emmix were beaten out by the Snow Maiden from Curse of Strahd, which is basically the Spectre with added cold immunity. All three of these act in a very similar function. They can all burst down someone very, very quickly. One critical roll and your PCs are going to drop. To me, the difference here, and what you need to consider as a Dungeon Master when evaluating these, is the survivability without losing steam offensively. The Fire Newt has the most life and a neat gimmick where they can regain life, which is pretty tanky. But after 2 spell slots, because they're a Warlock, they're really only swinging at a +3 modifier to hit. The Bugbear, on the other hand, hits like a truck and has a good AC, but may or may not get a second hit in with that 27 hit point. 27 hit points. I don't know why I said that so weird at the end. The Spectre, or the Snow Maiden, has the smallest life, but will be taking half damage from most of the party, effectively doubling their hit points, and the Maiden still hits like a truck at a +4 modifier for a whopping 3d6, with the chance to cut off a PC from healing back up if the dice don't go their way, with an instant death. Now, a few levels later, when more characters unlock ways to deal magic damage to the Spectre or Snow Maiden, this changes. But when we're evaluating these stat blocks, we have to consider how powerful resistances and immunities are at specifically these lower levels. At CR2, we have 2 monsters that stand out really miles ahead of the pack, with the runner-up going to the Periton, and ultimately the deadliest CR2 being the Durgar Mind Master from, again, Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. And might I add that honestly, even with the Periton being an incredibly dangerous stat block in its own, this is still a runaway for the Mind Master. What we really want to watch out for our creatures as we start to ramp up here in power level is the ability to stick around for more than one round while having significant burst damage, both of which the Mind Master does very well. What makes the Mind Master so deadly is the way it is set up to roll so many dice. It has the multi-attack feature and it has ambush implications to initiate combat from invisibility. But when it reduces in size, it suddenly jumps to a hefty 39 hit point on average monster with an incredible 19 armor class this early in the game that attacks twice around at 4d6 plus 1 psychic damage, which will chew through barbarians who need to rage in order to recklessly attack to hit that 19 AC. Trust me, barbarians do not want to recklessly attack this thing and give it 2 advantage attacks back that ignore their damage resistances for 4d6 a pop. Meanwhile, the Paradin is an incredibly strong monster for its CR that's fast and hits hard, while also utilizing its fly speed to ignore melee-reliant characters in the early game, like paladins and even rogues. Moving on to CR3, we have another level that could have gone a few different ways. Really quickly, the runners-up are the Assassin Vine, which has so many hit points, while being resistant to fire, hitting hard, and locking players' action economy down, and the Eternal Flame Priest, whose stat block was incredibly impressive with a solid 15 AC, a decent amount of hit points, and maybe the most offensive set of spells you'll find on a stat block with Fireball, Scorching Ray, Burning Hands, and Firebolt. Oh, and they also get Blur. Just in case, they also get Blur. I mean, it's a CR3 stat block that can cast Fireball back to back against the party, and that is something you should be looking out for to be careful of. Creatures that can drop 2 to 3 players in one go with solid area of effect damage are always going to present a potentially deadly encounter for your party, which again is why I wanted to talk about them. But the strongest Dungeons & Dragons CR3 monster is in fact the Lava Child from Dungeon of the Mad Mage. They have no AC to speak of, but instead they have 60 hit points and are outright immune to damage from metal weapons. Meanwhile, they have multi-attack and advantage against any creatures with metal armor, and a damage attack that has more than 1 dice, meaning that when they do find those crits, because they're attacking at advantage, they'll be just that much bigger. Also, it's worth noting that their 2 hit modifiers are +6 and a +7, while most other stat blocks you'll find at this stage of the game will still be hitting at only a +5. On paper, it might seem a lot weaker than the Eternal Flame Priest with double Fireball, but don't forget, casters at this point can often throw Counterspell and totally shut down the priest. Meanwhile, the Lava Child has to be magicked and punched to death. Oh man, I really hope that did not just get this video demonetized. Oh no. Moving on to CR4, there is really only one right choice here, and it's the first stat block alphabetically, the Ancient Construct from Princes of the Apocalypse. AC 17, 102 hit points, magic resistance, damage immunities, condition immunities. It hits on a +10 for 3d8 +6 and throws a DC 17 Wisdom Save AoE slow spell that recharges on both a 5 and a 6. It's a lot of stuff. The only thing that keeps this as a CR4 creature is that the monster does not have multi-attack, and that is something to consider. So, if you use this in an encounter with more action economy, it will ramp up quickly on you in the scale of its lethality. If you leave it as a solo monster, I might not consider it better than the 2 runner-ups with the Banshee and the Reckoner. The Reckoner is surprisingly deadly coming out of an ambush. Because of its first strike ability, there's a good chance that the Reckoner might one-shot your party if it surprises them. An opening of roll initiative, lightning bolt, surprise condition, lightning bolt, death saves is a real possibility for your players. Additionally, an unsuspecting paladin moving forward after taking heavy damage already and smiting the Reckoner back, followed by a lightning backlash reaction from said Reckoner, could finish off many parties at this stage of the game. And of course, we have to consider the Banshee's instant TPK wail that she can do once per day. It certainly makes her very lethal if the dice don't go well. As we move on to CR5, I really thought this was either going to go to the Zombie Beholder or the Fire Elemental for different reasons. But ultimately, the strongest monster had to be the mighty Gorgon from the Monster Manual. There is no reason I can see as to why this was a CR5. Its AC is absurd at 19, it has a ridiculous 119 average life, it knocks players prone on a pretty high DC 16 strength save, and then if it succeeds, it gets a bonus attack, which against the now prone player will be at advantage with a +8 modifier on a 2d10 plus 5, so 4d10 plus 5 on a crit. Oh, and it has a petrifying breath weapon, Cone, that recharges 33% of the time. It just has all the factors we're looking out for that make it extremely deadly. Burst damage, check. Ability to wipe multiple players with one action, check. High survivability, check. I mean, you could give this thing a triple multi-attack and crank its save to a 15 on the breath weapon and leave its AC and hit points and everything else alone, and it could easily be a CR9 or 10. I mean, very easily. Moving on to CR6, we have another massive set of monsters that if you argued were the deadliest for their CR, I wouldn't necessarily disagree. I narrowed this down to the following 4. The Flame Wrath, which is maybe the tankiest spell slinger in the game and had a lot going for it. Good AoE, good survivability, and the ability to burst down a target. The Young White Dragon, which did all the things I liked about the Flame Wrath, probably even better with the exception of consistency on the recharge reliant breath weapon. Then you have the Mage, which is probably the toughest stat block out of all of these if used in higher level encounters paired with other monsters, because they are squishy. Counterspell, Fly, Fireball, Cone of Cold, Greater Invisibility. This caster block has it all. And finally, the monster that I am giving the title to for challenge rating 6, we have the Duergar Warlord from, again, Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. What makes this monster so strong and deadly to your party can be summed up in 2 words: action economy. The Warlord is simply too good as a boss with additional Duergar mobs supporting him, and so he has to be considered the strongest CR6 in the game, even over the Young White Dragon, which admittedly is far deadlier as a standalone creature. He can attack 3 times in a round while enlarged, and as part of his attack, he can generate 3 additional attacks. Not to mention, he has a casual AC of just, 20, and advantage on saves against spells. Literally, just advantage against spells. And finally, his ability to poof out of a hairy situation by just going invisible, it's all just too good. The Duergar Warlord, it is the strongest CR6 in the entire game. And so that brings us to CR7s, which was the easiest choice to make out of this bunch. This is hands down the Young Black Dragon from the Monster Manual. The funniest part about this is the Young Black Dragon is, a hair off of being identical to the CR6 Young White Dragon. You're basically trading 6 hit points for 1 additional AC, boosting it from a 17 to an 18. And then there's the whole elemental breath weapon or whatever. So why did the CR7 Dragon beat out the CR6? Honestly, because nothing else was really better at CR7. It was really weird. And I think it shows you just how good the CR6 monsters were. But that doesn't take anything away from the Young Black Dragon. This thing can still TPK your party if you are not careful. It hits decently at this point in the game, but it won't burst down any tanks with its 3 attacks unless it goes off with dice rolls. But where it gets really difficult for your players is that breath weapon at a massive 11d8 acid, though only a DC 14 dexterity save to have it. Recharging on a 5 up though, this could definitely TPK the group if they don't stay out of its line of fire. If it goes off 3 times in a 4 to 5 round fight, there's a good chance your players are going to lose a character or 2 or 5. And finally, we have the last CR for this video at least, with the champion of the challenge rating 8 monsters, the Mind Flayer Arcanist from the Monster Manual. Here's the deal. This monster, more than any others we talked about, is really the only pure glass cannon. We looked at a few other casters in this video and why they were still very dangerous, with most of them being surprisingly tanky and having a good survivability. But the Mind Flayer Arcanist is shockingly easy to kill, if you get a chance to, that is. But the Mind Flayer Arcanist has maybe one of the strongest spells in the entire game on its list, in the form of Wall of Force. This, for any of my Overwatch friends out there, can be used much like a beautifully timed Mei Ice Wall to isolate Reinhardt from the rest of his team. So because the Arcanist has this little trick followed up with a perma-stun tentacle attack, will in essence allow this version of the Mind Flayer to one-shot a party member right in front of the group without them being able to intervene on the other side of the glass, so to speak. And all it took was one attack roll at a +7 and a pretty high intelligence save at DC 15 to be failed. That's it. Your character is dead. They had their brains sucked out right in front of their friends, and they couldn't do a damn thing to stop it. Additionally, the Mind Flayer Arcanist's Mind Blast ability is a devastating AoE attack that is up there with the best of them, which you might be surprised at how easily it is to pick off a traveling group of adventurers with just one of these guys in the labyrinth of the Underdark or the maze of sewers below a large city. For runner-up, I'll give the award to the Hydra for laying on the action economy here, even though the attacks are maybe not as bursty to be dangerous right away, but it's meaty enough to have some serious staying power and win the war of attrition with any adventuring group. And so with that, I want to pass it over to you guys in the community. What did I get right? What did I get wrong? I want to know, how do you guys evaluate your monsters when balancing your encounters? What monster abilities are red flags that they might be tougher than meets the eye for you? Let me know in the comments down below. I, of course, want to thank all of my amazing Patreon supporters over at welcomeadventures.com. I really hope you guys have been enjoying this month's maps, and David absolutely crushed the Seaside Manor map. It's just gorgeous. Oh, and as a side note, just because I've been getting so much incredible support from all of you guys here in the community, as a small token of appreciation, I decided to this map just to push it out to all patrons on all tiers. Who gives a crap if you're signed up for maps or not, right? So if you are a patron, slide over and grab this map, even if you don't normally get this map, normally sign up for the, you get what I'm saying, right? Even if you don't normally get the maps, go get this map because it's available there for you to download. I hope that made sense. If this is your first time here and you love role-playing games as much as I do, I would love to have you subscribe. I put out videos on GM tips, player tips, tutorials, and more. So if that sounds like something you might be interested in, just hit that subscribe button down below and come join us. Thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Cody, and may your games be filled with awesome memories and even better friends. I'll catch you guys next time.
Yeah.